Tancitaro, Mexico, November 2012. The time is exactly 11:47 at night. A sudden phone ring shatters the dead silence of a dark bedroom. Maria Villanova violently wakes up and reaches for her glowing cell phone. An unknown caller ID flashes on the small digital screen. She answers with a trembling voice and hears the terrifying words that will destroy her life entirely. "We currently have your father." A cold and mechanical voice demands an impossible ransom of $600,000. They give her exactly 48 hours to deliver the massive payment. She gasps and explains she does not possess that kind of wealth. The ruthless caller simply tells her to sell her father's 20-acre avocado farm immediately. They strictly advise her to borrow the money because they absolutely do not care about her financial problems. Maria begs to speak with her father just to know he is still alive. The dark line simply goes dead, leaving her shaking uncontrollably in the quiet room. Her father owns valuable avocado orchards, but liquidating agricultural property takes several agonizing months. Financial institutions will never approve a massive loan in merely 48 hours. She desperately dials the local police department, hoping for a miraculous rescue operation. A tired police officer answers the emergency call and listens to her terrified pleas. She quickly explains the Knights Templar Cartel kidnapped her father and demanded $600,000. The officer abruptly interrupts her frantic story and asks for her exact location. Heavy silence fills the telephone line before he delivers a completely devastating truth. He bluntly states the department cannot help her under any circumstances whatsoever. Maria demands to know why the sworn protectors of the city refuse to assist a dying man. The officer explains that the ruthless cartel completely controls that specific agricultural region. He admits that if his police officers enter that territory, they will be instantly slaughtered. He hangs up the phone, leaving Maria completely alone with her horrific nightmare. Her father is going to die, and nobody is coming to save them. But Maria is actually wrong about one incredibly important detail regarding this lawless situation. Help is indeed coming, but it will definitely not arrive wearing a shiny police badge. We must jump forward to February 23, 2013 to meet the savior. Dr. Jose Manuel Mireles wakes up sharply to the terrifying sound of heavy gunshots echoing across his property. The familiar rhythm of automatic weapons fills the dawn air. He quickly gets dressed and checks his mobile phone for any urgent updates. A text message from his terrified neighbor confirms another violent abduction on the main road. The heavily armed cartel soldiers took Javier, a local cattle rancher and father of 3 young children. This marks the 3rd violent kidnapping this month in their small, isolated farming community. The 54-year-old physician knows the victim very well. Mireles previously lived in California for 10 years before returning to his beloved Mexican hometown. He came back hoping for a peaceful retirement, but instead stepped directly into an active war zone. The Knights Templar Cartel officially controls every single aspect of the local economy. They are not merely drug traffickers hiding in the deep jungle shadows. They operate like a brutal shadow government, taxing absolutely everything from cattle to fresh limes. The cartel specifically targets the booming avocado industry, demanding heavy monthly payments from independent farmers. Mireles currently pays them $1,200 every single month just for the privilege of staying alive. But greedy criminal empires are never truly satisfied with their current financial gains. Last week, the ruthless cartel bosses arbitrarily raised his personal extortion fee to $2,000. The physician simply cannot afford this impossible new financial burden. We must rewind 24 hours to understand the breaking point of this brave doctor. Mireles is driving his truck home from the medical clinic after a long shift. 5 heavily armed men wearing black tactical vests suddenly stop his vehicle at an illegal checkpoint. They surround the truck, gripping automatic rifles, and order him to step outside immediately. He knows better than to resist the ruthless cartel executioners. They violently blindfold the respected doctor and shove him into the back of a dark van. They drive recklessly for an hour before finally removing his dirty blindfold inside an abandoned warehouse. He sits tied to a single chair on a cold concrete floor, waiting for his inevitable death. A man in his 30s, wearing expensive jewelry and a luxury watch, slowly walks into the empty room. The interrogation officially begins. The arrogant cartel boss informs the doctor that he owes the organization a massive debt. Mireles breathes heavily and explains he always pays the demanded $2,000 every single month. The tattooed leader simply smiles and declares the new monthly tax is $5,000. Mireles desperately insists he does not have that kind of money available. The cartel boss casually decides to hold him hostage until his family pays. The terrified physician spends 6 agonizing hours tied to the wooden chair without any food or water. Finally, his desperate brother arrives, carrying $5,000 in borrowed cash from sympathetic neighbors. They release Mireles but deliver one final chilling threat before he leaves the dark warehouse. They promise the fee will double next month and threaten to slaughter his entire family if he contacts the authorities. Mireles drives home that night physically exhausted, but shaking uncontrollably with burning rage. He lies awake in the dark, realizing the corrupt government will never intervene to save their community. The local police secretly work for the powerful cartel, and the national army simply does not care. He understands a horrifying truth about surviving in a completely lawless society. When the established system abandons you completely, you must prepare to fight alone. The green gold of Michoacán represents a billion-dollar agricultural empire feeding the entire world. The Knights Templar Cartel recognized this massive wealth and methodically infiltrated every single level of production. They established a shadow tax system, dictating exactly who could harvest and when they could sell. Armed cartel members literally stood in the orchards counting every single crate of harvested fruit. The desperate farmers became hostage laborers on their own ancestral lands. Dr. Mireles sits in his quiet home nursing the bruises from his brutal kidnapping ordeal. The psychological trauma of being tied to a chair quickly transforms into a cold and calculating fury. He realizes that paying the extortion fee merely finances the very bullets used to terrorize them. The cartel will endlessly squeeze the farmers until they lose their land, their families, and their lives. Compliance is no longer a valid survival strategy. On the evening of February 24th, he quietly summons 20 local men to his private ranch. They arrive under the cover of darkness, carefully avoiding the main roads patrolled by cartel scouts. These are ordinary citizens, including humble shop owners, dedicated teachers, mechanics, and hardworking truck drivers. Every single man sitting in that tense room shares a common bond of deep trauma and financial ruin. They have all been violently extorted or robbed. Mireles stands before the exhausted group and asks how many of them have suffered a recent kidnapping. 8 rough hands slowly raise into the air, casting long shadows against the dimly lit walls. He then asks how many paid the cartel extortion fee this exact month. All 20 hands shoot up, instantly acknowledging their humiliating submission to the ruthless criminal empire. The room feels incredibly heavy with shared grief and absolute desperation. The doctor asks one final question regarding how many of them actually called the local police. 15 hands rise initially but quickly drop back down in profound disgust and sheer frustration. Everyone in the room knows perfectly well that the authorities are either terrified or completely corrupt. Calling the police usually results in the cartel finding out exactly who complained within an hour. The official justice system is merely an illusion. Mireles looks deep into their tired eyes and proposes a completely insane but necessary strategy. He states they must immediately stop paying the extortion fees and stop obeying the cartel commands. He declares they must completely stop waiting for a corrupt government to magically arrive and save them. A local farmer nervously asks what they are supposed to do against heavily armed criminal assassins. The tension in the quiet room reaches a boiling point. The doctor answers with absolute conviction that they must fight the powerful cartel themselves. The farmers protest, pointing out that the Knights Templar possess military-grade automatic weapons and tactical gear. Mireles remains perfectly calm and simply states they must acquire their own automatic rifles immediately. A heavy silence falls over the shocked men as they process the gravity of this terrifying declaration. They are actively discussing a full-scale civil war. One terrified man whispers that fighting the cartel means they will all be brutally slaughtered. Mireles fires back, reminding them that the cartel is already killing them off one by one anyway. He argues passionately that if they must die, they should at least die standing up like men. The powerful logic of his argument pierces through their deep psychological fear. A long and agonizing silence dominates the small secret gathering. Finally, a brave farmer named Miguel speaks up, and firmly declares he is completely in. One by one, the other 19 men slowly nod their heads and agree to join the rebellion. They are 20 completely untrained men, lacking weapons tactical experience or a solid military plan. But they possess something significantly more dangerous than bullets. They are completely done being helpless victims, waiting for their inevitable execution in the dark. At 11 o'clock, that exact same night, the men quietly gather together once again. This time, they do not arrive empty-handed but bring whatever crude weapons they can quickly find. They carry rusty hunting rifles, old shotguns, and exactly 2 black market automatic weapons. They are visibly terrified, knowing most of them have never fired a weapon at another human being. But the fear of doing absolutely nothing is finally much stronger. Morellis acts as their natural tactical commander and quickly divides the men into 4 separate response units. He instructs them to constantly patrol the dark town in strict 4-hour overlapping shifts. If anyone spots the Knights Templar, they must immediately radio the other teams for emergency backup. They will respond together as a single unified force against the roaming cartel tax collectors. The strategic foundation of their amateur army is officially established. He looks at his makeshift militia and delivers their final and most critical operational order. If the cartel soldiers raise their weapons and shoot, the farmers must absolutely shoot back without hesitation. The men grip their old rifles tightly and step out into the cold night air. They move silently into the dark and completely empty streets of their small agricultural town. The deadly hunt for the powerful cartel members has finally begun. For the first 2 agonizing hours, absolutely nothing happens in the quiet residential neighborhoods. They hear only the distant barking of stray dogs and the normal sounds of a sleeping Mexican town. The immense adrenaline flowing through their veins makes every single passing minute feel like an eternity. But the newly formed militia remains incredibly vigilant in the shadows. The inevitable violent collision between farmers and cartel assassins is only moments away. February 25th, 2013, exactly 10 o'clock at night. The Knights Templar Cartel returns to Tansataro to deliver their promised vengeance. 15 heavy trucks roll aggressively into the quiet town carrying 50 heavily armed cartel gunmen. But they are completely unaware that the frightened farmers have rapidly evolved into a formidable tactical militia. The predators are unknowingly driving straight into a meticulously planned defensive kill zone. The advancing cartel convoy suddenly screeches to a violent halt. Massive agricultural tractors securely block every single major road leading into the vulnerable residential areas. The farmers spent the entire day building heavy barricades using thick sandbags and reinforced steel. They have strategically positioned their best marksmen on the highest rooftops, overlooking the blocked intersections. The element of surprise now belongs entirely to the defenders of the town. Furious cartel soldiers immediately open fire with their military-grade weapons. A devastating hail of heavy bullets punches through the metal tractors and shatters the surrounding glass windows. The night sky literally ignites with hundreds of bright muzzle flashes. The brave farmers return fire using their hunting rifles and newly acquired automatic weapons. This is no longer a brief skirmish, but a desperate siege for absolute survival. Dr. Morellis moves rapidly through the chaotic war zone, ignoring the deadly crossfire. He constantly runs between the fortified defensive positions, directing return fire and treating severely wounded men. A stray cartel bullet viciously grazes his leg, but he completely ignores the agonizing pain. The intense battle rages continuously from 10 o'clock at night until 3 o'clock in the morning. The farmers refuse to surrender a single inch of ground. By 3 in the morning, the exhausted cartel soldiers completely exhaust their massive ammunition supply. The humiliated assassins are forced to aggressively retreat back into the dark mountains. Morellis collapses against a cold brick wall, bleeding and physically drained but victorious. 3 brave farmers lost their lives, and 8 others sustained severe gunshot wounds. But the impossible defense held perfectly, and the powerful cartel failed to conquer their town. News of the miraculous victory spreads across the Michoacán region like a raging wildfire. Desperate farmers in neighboring towns realize that the invincible Knights Templar can actually be defeated. Within a single week, 5 additional agricultural communities rise up and violently expel their local cartel oppressors. The armed citizens establish strict security checkpoints and refuse to pay any more illegal taxes. The massive cartel empire begins to violently fracture. By late March, 10 distinct towns are completely free from the suffocating cartel grip. They officially call their growing rebellion the Autodefensas, or self-defense forces. Dr. Morales rapidly becomes the charismatic public face of this unprecedented civilian uprising. He constantly tells international television reporters that they are not lawless vigilantes but desperate citizens. The Mexican government nervously watches this armed civilian movement, growing significantly stronger than the local police. The farmers of Tansataro quickly realize that a volunteer militia cannot secure a permanent peace. They understand that weary volunteers will eventually need to return to their neglected avocado orchards. In January 2014, they make a brilliant and highly sophisticated strategic decision. They vote to create a permanent, full-time professional security force, perfectly funded by their own agricultural profits. They call this elite organization QSEPT. The financial structure of this new private police force is an absolute masterclass in economic organization. Every single independent avocado grower agrees to contribute exactly $12 for every ton of harvested fruit. The supportive local government matches this impressive agricultural contribution dollar for dollar. This brilliant taxation strategy generates an incredible operating budget of $1.2 million every single year. The farmers effectively bought their own sovereignty. The elite recruitment process specifically targets highly disciplined men from within the avocado industry itself. They hire exactly 80 dedicated officers, including former military soldiers and experienced private security guards. These men fight fiercely because they are protecting their own families and their own economic livelihoods. The generous budget allows them to purchase heavily armored bulletproof trucks costing $50,000 each. The amateur militia transforms into a professional army. The town rapidly transforms into an impenetrable tactical fortress, floating in a sea of extreme cartel violence. QSEPT officers establish 8 heavily fortified checkpoints, covering every single access road into the region. They maintain aggressive 24-hour patrols using military-grade automatic rifles legally purchased from the government. They utilize highly encrypted radio systems to coordinate rapid deployment teams against any approaching threats. Nothing enters or leaves without their permission. The most powerful weapon they deploy is an incredibly vast civilian intelligence network. Thousands of regular farmers and local workers serve as the hidden eyes and ears of the new security force. They instantly report any suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar faces lurking near the valuable agricultural borders. The Knights Templar completely lose the crucial element of surprise that previously fueled their terrifying reign. Tansataro becomes a deadly trap for cartel assassins. By March 2014, the Knights Templar face total economic collapse in the region. The brutal cartel has officially lost control of 20 highly profitable agricultural towns. Their massive illegal income stream is rapidly evaporating, making it impossible to pay their vast army of hitmen. The desperate cartel bosses realize they desperately need to make a terrifying public statement to regain total control. They choose to eliminate Dr. Morales. The Knights Templar face complete economic annihilation as their massive agricultural extortion network collapses. They desperately need to assassinate the charismatic leader who shattered their invincible reputation across the volatile region. On March 15, 2014, Dr. Morales boards a small private plane to attend a crucial security meeting. He travels with only a trusted pilot, flying directly over the treacherous mountains of Michoacán. High above the rugged terrain, the aircraft engine suddenly sputters and dies completely without any warning. The small plane drops violently from the sky, giving the passengers absolutely no time to brace for impact. The fragile aircraft violently smashes into the thick trees, ripping the metal wings completely apart. The shattered fuselage tumbles aggressively down the steep mountainside, before finally coming to a devastating halt. Morales miraculously survives the horrific impact, but remains barely conscious amidst the twisted metal and shattered glass. He suffers from 7 broken ribs, multiple severe facial fractures, and dangerous internal bleeding. The brave pilot dies instantly upon impact, leaving the crippled doctor completely alone in the isolated wilderness. Local villagers eventually discover the smoking wreckage and carefully pull his broken body from the destroyed fuselage. Emergency medical teams immediately airlift the critically injured leader directly to a specialized hospital in Mexico City. While the doctor fights for his life inside the intensive care unit, a dark shadow falls over his movement. His trusted bodyguard, known as Papa Smurf, violently betrays the fundamental principles of their rebellion. He aggressively claims leadership of the scattered militias and initiates secret negotiations with the corrupt government. This devastating internal betrayal fractures the powerful self-defense movement right down the middle. The treacherous new leader officially agrees to disarm his loyal fighters in exchange for joining a heavily monitored government rural defense force. However, many brave Autodefensas absolutely refuse to surrender their hard-earned weapons to a corrupt system. They choose to remain fiercely loyal to the hospitalized doctor, creating a dangerous ideological split. The Mexican government immediately recognizes a perfect tactical opportunity hidden within this chaotic internal division. They decide to aggressively target the weakened doctor before he can successfully rebuild his fractured civilian army. On June 27th, 2014, heavily armed military units descend upon his private safe house. Federal and state police forces coordinate a massive tactical raid to capture the rebellious leader permanently. Heavily armed soldiers violently breach the front doors with their weapons drawn and secure the designated target. The recovering doctor demands to know the official criminal charges justifying this massive military invasion of his home. The commanding officer coldly states he is being aggressively arrested for illegal weapons possession and violating federal firearms laws. The government deliberately orchestrates a flawless trap to completely neutralize their biggest political threat. Federal agents methodically search the secure property and conveniently discover 14 unauthorized firearms alongside scattered ammunition. They also strategically plant a small amount of marijuana and cocaine to completely destroy his pristine public reputation. Morelos knows perfectly well the illicit drugs are entirely fake, but the undeniable truth no longer matters here. He is brutally handcuffed and dragged away to a maximum security federal prison in Sonora. The heavy prison doors slam shut securely, locking the inspirational leader far away from his beloved Michoacán. The government sends a brutally clear message to the desperate citizens that challenging their absolute authority guarantees total destruction. Without their visionary tactical commander, the remaining civilian uprising completely collapses within a few short months. The terrible cartels slowly begin to creep back into the vulnerable agricultural towns, claiming bloody vengeance. June 27th, 2014, marks the absolute end of the widespread civilian uprising. Dr. Morelos sits locked inside a maximum security federal prison while his fractured Autodefensas movement completely collapses. Most exhausted fighters simply disband and return home to their neglected agricultural fields. A few corrupt individuals actively join the criminal networks they originally swore to destroy. Within months, the brutal cartels slowly return to reclaim their lost territories across the bleeding state. By 2015, a terrifying new criminal syndicate arrives to completely dominate the shattered region. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel emerges as a heavily militarized organization, significantly more violent than the defeated Knights Templar. They ruthlessly sweep through Michoacán, utilizing military-grade weapons and extreme tactical brutality. Town after town quickly falls back into the dark abyss of cartel control. Former self-defense strongholds completely surrender to this unstoppable new wave of criminal terror. But when the ruthless assassins finally arrive at the borders of Tancitaro, they encounter a completely different reality. They do not find a disorganized group of terrified farmers holding rusty hunting rifles. They immediately face the heavily armed professional police force known as CUSEPT, standing firmly at the barricades. Exactly 80 highly trained officers wait patiently inside expensive bulletproof trucks, gripping modern military automatic weapons. The isolated avocado capital refuses to surrender their hard-earned sovereignty. The aggressive cartel violently attacks the fortified checkpoints once, twice, and then a bloody third time. Every single massive assault is met with overwhelming defensive firepower and absolute tactical discipline. The brutal firefights transform the agricultural borders into a literal war zone filled with deafening explosions and shattered metal. Brave officers tragically lose their lives defending the barricades alongside dozens of dead cartel gunmen. But the impenetrable fortress of Tancitaro successfully repels every single organized invasion. After suffering massive casualties during the third devastating attack, the cartel simply stops trying to conquer the town. The relentless sieges prove entirely too expensive and strategically exhausting for the criminal syndicate. Tancitaro miraculously survives the violent onslaught because the dedicated farmers never stopped fighting for their families. More importantly, they never stopped paying the critical financial price required for their absolute protection. Every single harvested avocado continues funding their massive private security budget. The wealthy farmers willingly pay exactly $12 for every single ton of green gold harvested from their land. This relentless financial commitment guarantees a constant security budget exceeding $1 million every single year. They essentially operate an independent microstate completely detached from the failing Mexican government. The heavy price of permanent safety requires constant vigilance and an unwavering dedication to their private army. Freedom in this dark corner of the world is purely a financial transaction. Today, in the year 2025, Tanchitaro remains significantly safer than the rest of Michoacán. The elite police force continues to aggressively patrol the dark streets and strictly guard the fortified checkpoints. But the surrounding state continues bleeding profusely as rival cartels constantly wage brutal territorial wars. The wealthy avocado capital is absolutely not a peaceful paradise. It is merely a heavily armed island of survival surrounded entirely by a raging ocean of endless violence. Every single Super Bowl Sunday, millions of Americans consume massive quantities of fresh guacamole. They happily eat 200 million avocados without ever thinking about the heavily armed checkpoints protecting those specific orchards. They never spare a single thought for Dr. Morales or the brave farmers who fought a literal war for agricultural independence. In the dark mountains of Mexico, the terrifying avocado war never actually ended. It simply evolved into a bloody and incredibly expensive daily routine,